Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to our council meeting Wednesday the 4th of May 2022. Good to see you in the chamber and those online. Before we get into our order of business, just a bit of housekeeping. Obviously the meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed on our council's YouTube channel. Health and safety procedures are well known to you. The emergency exits and the evacuation point in the square Te Maraeoine. Obviously this is a non-smoking facility. Any incidents, report them to the committee administrator, and in the unlikely event that a defibrillator is required, it's at the front of house on the ground floor. Obviously we have our COVID-19 protection framework in place. We're at an orange setting, and I ask you just to follow all those protocols. To our people online, and welcome to our councillors online, Councillor Barrett, Councillor Bowen, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Mickelard and Councillor Naylor. Voting will be done by voice and hands. I'll do both. And unless there's a division is required. Also, if I could just ask all presenters just to say their name and title the first time, because there may be a couple of times you have to speak to council. Right, and if councillors just keep their cameras on if they can, and microphones muted, unless obviously asking questions or addressing the meeting. Right, order of business. Number one is apologies, and we have just one from Councillor Bowen for possible early departure, depending on how long the meeting runs for. I don't have any other apologies, so I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Being no comment to that, we will vote, please. I'll just wait for the screen to come up, and we'll vote. We'll do that with a show of hands. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, notification of additional items. There are none, and I don't have any late items. So we'll move on to number 3, declarations of interest, if any. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in item 7, which is the appointment to a catch perch, and we'll withdraw from that item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move to number 4 on our agenda, which is the confirmation of the minutes. The Council resolves the minutes of the Council meeting 6th of April 2022, Part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any matters arising, councillors, page 7 of our order papers. Okay, there being none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I could just draw attention to item H, which was the Calhoun Park proposal to grant a lease. I'm noted as abstaining on that item, but I declared an interest at the beginning of the item and double-checked it on the YouTube clip, part B, 101, 29 seconds, that I declared it and withdrew from that item. And I'd like that amended, please, in the minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for your diligent viewing of Council TV. Well done.
That's the only minute I'll watch.
Right. Okay, we will note that. All right, again, we'll just get the screen up. And we'll vote on confirming the minutes. All right, again, if we do it with a show of hands, please. All those in favour? And that's unanimous, thank you. Right, through to our order of business, which is around the reports. Number 5 is a review of the Directors, Trustees policy. There's a memo from our Governance Manager, Hannah. I'll just wait for her to get round to the table and speak to this. So councillors, this is on page 21 of your papers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've asked Sarah Claridge, our Democracy and Governance Advisor, to join me for this paper because she was involved in this review, and this is her paper. Just very quickly, this is just part of our regular review of governance policies. It's our opportunity to consider whether our policy as it was fit for purpose, and review it for good practice and collate any procedures that we're currently using. You'll be aware, members, that the Local Government Act requires us to have an appointments policy, or to have a policy that governs what we're looking for when we appoint people, to be clear. And what we've made sure here is that we have clearly covered off all council organisations, not just CCOs and CCTOs, and just to reassure you that the CCOs themselves are aware that we've been going through this process, as they have. It's in line with the other piece of work that we're doing on the trust deeds, which will come to council next month. Also to note that there is a minor correction that's needed in the policy document. Some very eagle eyes may have noticed on the top of page 4, Airport Directors Council recently changed the number of directors, so it should say that council appoints 6 of 6 directors. And on page 7, there's one noun missing. It should say competency, skills and knowledge. The third noun was missing after the and. Happy to take any questions.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thank you, Sarah and Hannah. Just wanted a question about the Joint Strategic Committee. You haven't kind of referred to it in this.
Standing committees are not covered in the policy.
Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you, Hannah and Sarah, for this report. I did have a question. On page 27, it says, in the event of a conflict, the deed or constitution takes precedence over this policy. But on page 43, it says, in addition, the trust deeds or constitutions in case of companies often include, but this policy will take precedence over any trust deed. So I just wanted clarity over which one.
Certainly. Through you, Mr Mayor. Page 43 is the old policy.
So that the one on page
27 is the correct one.
Is
the new one.
Is the new one that we're looking to vote on.
So we're changing it from that system.
The deed will take precedent.
Wonderful. Cool. That was my first question. And my other question was around the reference groups. And I was wondering why we haven't mentioned them at all in this policy.
Thank you for asking that question. I was expecting it. So the reference groups, we have appointed councillors to be liaisons on those groups, but they don't have voting rights. And the Local Government Act requirement on the appointments policy is specific to having voting rights on an organisation. So therefore they're separate, outside of the policy.
Okay, thank you, Mr Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Hannah and Sarah, for the work on this. Just wanted to understand how well the diversity provisions that are in our policy align with the constitutions of our council organizations.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the constitutions and the deeds of the organisations themselves don't reference diversity. However, what we have done is, you will remember in the latest statement of expectation and then through into the statements of intent of the organisations, we specifically requested some work on diversity in the boards, and that's sitting in our CCO statements of intent. So that's how we've ensured that that follow-through is there.
Great, thank you. My other question, Mr. Mayor, is just around the provision for reappointment. It seems that this policy doesn't in and of itself impose any term limit as such, and just wondered where, if anywhere, between the constitutions of the council organizations or this policy, there's any view towards term limits, or whether there's effectively none.
Mr. Meth, the policy as it stands notes that after that a term of appointment could be a maximum of 3 years, but then Councillor Barrett's correct, there's no statement as to how many times someone could be reappointed. That's left with the panel to make a recommendation to the council if that person chose to reapply.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just I wanted to understand on page 28, rolling into page 29 of the order paper, page 3 and 4 of the draft policy, the accuracy of the statements under the CCOs noting how many council appoint as trustees. I know Te Manawa, I think, do they have 2 iwi reps, so that may be right. I'm not sure who else appoints, maybe the Art Society, but the region, I thought we appointed all trustees to the Regent and all to the Globe, and even on the airport on the following page where it says 2 of the 5 directors, I think that's not accurate, and I'm wondering if where it says the Regent, maybe we appoint 6 of up to 9 trustees, because they have the ability to co-opt, and 5 of up to 7 trustees. I'm wondering if we need a few extra words, and I wonder if the airport board needs correcting completely.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the airport does need correcting to 6 out of 6. As for the others, what you've said is accurate. The boards have the ability to co-opt. So there's the ability to have up to 9. So I'm comfortable with adding the word up to, if you'd prefer that, councillors.
I would, but thank you. I think it just reads more clearly, because I don't think they have to have a maximum of 7. They can operate with 5, for example, with the Globe. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. No further questions. Nothing online. So thank you, Hannah, Sarah. So we'll wait for you to come back, and we will look to get the recommendation up in a moment. So there's 2 resolutions there, councillors. Review of the appointment of directors, trustees policy. One, that council resolves adopting the appointment of the directors, trustees policy 2022, attachment 1, to replace the former appointment of directors, trustees policy 2018. Number 2, that council delegate authority to the acting chief executive to make any minor amendments to the appointment of directors, trustees policy 2022. I'm happy to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any comments? There being none, we'll put this to a vote by hands. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Thank you, unanimously. Right. Number 6 on our report section is around the draft Palmerston Stormwater Bylaw deliberations and adoption, and we've got a report from our policy manager, Julie and Anne-Marie. Welcome. It's page 53, councillors, of your papers.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor and Councillors. I'm very happy to be recommending the adoption of the Stormwater Bylaw. We're pretty happy to take the report as read, obviously, but I just have a couple of comments. This review began way back in September 2020 with a Section 155 determination. That review was delayed due to COVID, lockdown and subsequent staff redeployments and various things. Ideally, this adoption of the bylaw would follow the new stormwater framework, which is described in the report, but we're out of time now, and Council needs to adopt this bylaw to make sure it has one in place. In February, Planning and Strategy Committee heard the submissions, which reflected the complex nature of stormwater management and the overlaps with RMA planning. Quite a few of the issues raised by submitters belong to other processes, and we've tried to explain that in the report and very detailed analysis of submissions that Emery's done. The changes reflect the various issues raised about increasing numbers of private stormwater systems, and so the changes made relate to the operation and maintenance of those private systems. As I said, we note that many of the points made by submitters aren't reflected in the draft bylaw, but they've all been referred to staff or can be incorporated into the stormwater framework that's being developed. Some of the questions raised at the time of hearing by councillors are also covered in the report. So we're happy to answer questions. We have technical and legal advice on hand, should that be required. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. I'll just kick off. I mean, this has been well socialised over a few attempts, and understand that we needed to make just some minor adjustments to some of the language last time. Are there any red flags, any major things that we need to be aware of?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, I don't think so. Just to add to what Julie said, some of the points made by submitters also can be taken forward into district plan matters. There is a plan change coming up. I'm looking to David just to confirm that in the next wee while. It is an action in the stormwater chapter of the waters plan. So yes, so many of the things that submitters raise, like the increase in pervious or impermeable surfaces, should be addressed through that plan change.
Right, okay. Good. Okay, questions? Councillor Barrett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Julie and to Anne-Marie for the report and all the work that it represents. My question arises on page 56 of our order paper, which is around clause 2, the purpose of the bylaw. It's paragraph 3.4.1 there, and it's specifically to understand the rationale and potential impacts of the removal of specific reference to environmental pollution and the switch to, I guess, a more generic language perhaps of inflows. Could you just help us understand why we're doing that and any potential impacts of doing that?
Okay, so I will provide a general answer, and then I'm going to hand to Emery for something more specific. In short, the effect is nil. There is no effect on the removal of that language. The way that the language has been framed in the bylaw is quite a subtle distinction to do with the RMA and yeah, that was not a general answer. Let me try again. The purpose of the bylaw is, as it's framed in the purpose, is just using a different way of describing the same effects. So the term pollutants and contaminants is really just framed that way because that's consistent with the language through the rest of the bylaw. And now I'm going to stop mangling that and hand over to Emery and or Alex.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question, Councillor Barrett. The change has been made to, I suppose, unbundle a number of different threads, I suppose, in the purpose statement, and the change to the 2.1c really reflected a submission made by Rangatane o Manawatu, which was very RMA flavoured, I suppose. So we are trying to reflect the Local Government Act language in that sub-clause better, and as Julia explained, there had been a change in part 4 of the bylaw which reframed or moved away from describing things as environmental pollution and look to, I suppose, broaden how we described discharges of contaminants to receiving environments that have come from inflows to the network. So yeah, it really is trying to, I suppose, keep honest to the Local Government Act framework, but it is quite challenging, as explained in the report, to separate RMA and LGA matters because of the nature of the network and the activities that happen in that network. I think I'll stop there. I feel like I've hopefully answered your question, and I see Alex there. And Alex, do you wish to make any further comment?
I'm just sort of catching up. Unfortunately, I've been booted out of the meeting a couple of times, so I haven't heard the question, I'm afraid.
Perhaps we could ask, through you, Mr Mayor, if there's clarification required by Councillor Barrett before we ask. This is Alex Sinclair, sorry, from CR Law.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So, Councillor, you've got answers to what you're asking?
Thanks, I have. The further question that I'd have really relates to the response that it is basically a semantic difference only, and that it doesn't affect anything beyond that. Has that been validated by, I guess, how has that been validated? Have other councils taken this approach already and we're simply following that? Or yeah, how have we validated that view?
So I'm aware that Alex hasn't heard the question. So Alex, the query was about the removal of the term environmental pollution in the purpose of the bylaw section, and we have provided some advice about the consistency of language throughout the bylaw, and really in that place it probably makes little difference to have the removal of that term, but we've tried to make a consistent response throughout the whole bylaw, and Emery's just explained the RMA and LGA differences. Apologies, Mr Mayor, this is a strange situation.
Apologies, thank you very much. I've caught up. Essentially, yes, it would be a semantic difference because you're adopting in this particular bylaw the RMA definition of contaminant, which is incredibly broad. It's really anything entering, and I think the actual definition is replicated in the bylaw, any substance which would entering in any type of receiving environment that could affect its biological, physical or chemical composition. So I think the concept of environmental pollution is amply covered by the purpose statement. I think it is broader than what it was before.
Great, thank you, Alex, as well. Back to you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Johnson?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just had a question about the response to this submission on page, I think it's page 100, wasn't it? 199. Anyway, it was the comment, the submission request to include the reference to Te Mana o Te Wai, and then the officer response that there was an implied reference and that it wasn't appropriate to include Te Mana o Te Wai specifically in the bylaw. I'm not 100% clear as to what the problem would be with including reference to that document in the bylaw. Could I have a bit more explanation?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It was a submission point that we laboured over, I suppose, in terms of the best place for reflecting, a very important concept, I suppose. Te Mana o Te Wai meaning the fundamental importance of water, and again, further to, in response to Rangatane's Manawatu's submission, who raised that point. I think it was felt on balance that inclusion of acknowledgement, there's another, I suppose, a new addition to the purpose statement which acknowledges iwi Māori's kaitiaki role of water in general, and then references rangatane's particular interest in water resources within the city has been made. So it's not to say that we're not respecting the principle of te mana o te wai in the bylaw. We feel it's more appropriate that, I mean, it has a legal meaning in the Resource Management Act, and that will be taken through other regulatory tools such as the district plan, and you would have seen recently that the Regional Council has opened up the conversation on freshwater management in the region, in which te mana o te wai is a consideration in that conversation. So yeah, it's a balancing act, I suppose, with sticking true. Again, we've got this issue with the overlaps between the LGA and the RMA, and how do we best respond through the bylaw. So that was the position that we reached on te mana o te wai.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Anne-Marie and Julie. Just on the page 56, under the definition of watercourse, I just wondered if we are referencing the Hokowhiru Lagoon is under the definition under watercourse. Because you're talking about every river, stream, passage or channel on or underground, whether natural or not. And I just wonder if Hokowhiru Lagoon is classified in any of that definition.
Through Mr Mayor, I'm not sure whether Alex, you have a view on that, or whether I'm looking over to Mike, whether he would consider the lagoon to come under that definition.
It certainly could. I think, well, to explain a little of the etiology for that particular point, the definition for watercourse has been imported from the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act, and it was to provide a more unified definition within the broader statutory context. And I understand that watercourse is actually only used in one place in the bylaw, which I'm just trying to find now. Just bear with me. Yeah, we're talking clause 9.3, which I'm afraid, I'm sorry, I don't have your page references. The only reference to watercourse is in that clause in relation to private, a premises on which there is a watercourse, and it sets out obligations to maintain the watercourse or stop bank or other defences against water, and that's why the definition from the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act has been imported, specifically relating to those stop banks and ensuring that they are stop banks and watercourses are adequate for flood protection purposes.
So, Alex, the answer would be no, this definition doesn't relate to the lagoon?
It certainly doesn't intend to relate to the lagoon. I think if you took the definition by itself, it might cover the lagoon, but in practice, the bylaw doesn't seek to regulate the lagoon itself. And the one place where the definition is used, it would not cover the lagoon, I don't believe.
Just that the lagoon is a body of stormwater.
If I might, through the chair, I think what Alex is saying is the only instance of the use of that language is in section 9, which is operation and maintenance of private stormwater systems. So it's just not relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no further questions online around the table. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Alex, online. We will get the recommendations up, and go to any comment, but I'll read these out. So this is around our Palmerston North City Stormwater Bylaw, the deliberations and adoption, that Council resolves and confirms 1A, Palmerston North Stormwater Bylaw 2022 is the most appropriate means for addressing the perceived problems of protecting the public stormwater network and regulating inflows into the public stormwater network. And B, the form of the bylaw is the most appropriate form of bylaw. And C, the bylaw does not give rise to any implications under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990. Number 2, that the Council adopts the Palmerston North Stormwater Bylaw 2022 and the Palmerston North Stormwater Bylaw Administration Manual 2022 as attached to this report. I will move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it for any comments. I'll kick off by thanking the officers for pulling this bit of work together as we enter the Three Waters reform. It's a pretty important bit of work to make sure that we've got it right and tidied away. It's often the forgotten water too, stormwater, and we only start to hear about it and any great knowledge when there's some sort of flooding event. So a pretty important network for our city, and again, thanks to officers and submitters that have come into the whole project as well. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make some comments around the Rangitane Manawatu submission, which I thought was a very helpful and informative submission, and did signal for me some things that perhaps might have not been front of mind, certainly for me anyway, when looking at the bylaw. So I just wanted to acknowledge publicly that that was a very helpful submission. And also, I note that some changes have been made to incorporate some of the points that were raised in the bylaw, which is good. And I accept that it's a complex process between deciding what goes into the bylaw, what's covered by the district plan, etc. But I would like to note that, you know, the process that we have at the moment, that the bylaws are dealt with through the policy, planning and policy committee, and we don't have an iwi rep on that committee. And also that the bylaw, this particular bylaw, has been dealt with in council because, if I remember correctly, we ran out of time in that committee. And also we have no iwi rep on council committee at the moment. So I do feel that we are not necessarily hearing directly an iwi voice in the matter because of our processes and how we deal with bylaws. And I just think it would be worth a consideration for future composition of committees and where things are dealt with, that we factor in that issues that are particularly important to Mana Whenua, like fresh water, are dealt with in a forum in which we have an iwi rep and an iwi voice. So I just thought I'd raise that point. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, to acknowledge, as you have, the officers' work and the value of the submitters coming into the process as well. As you will have picked up from my questioning, I do have, I guess, still some residual concern around the removal of explicit reference to environmental pollution in the purpose, but that's largely been sufficient in response in terms of what I've heard from officers and from legal advice, that it is a semantic rather than a substantive difference. But I would just underscore the essential nature of this bylaw to actually give us a regulatory tool to address environmental pollution in our urban streams and other waterways. And as many of us have had the opportunity in recent times to see some of those up close and personal and see some of the environmental pollution that actually is in our urban stream network at times, it is important that we do keep that function very strongly resourced both from a regulatory and a practical point of view to ensure the health of our urban stream network. So happy to support as presented with only a small residual concern around the semantic difference, but happy to proceed as proposed.
Okay, we'll get back up online, just one moment. Okay, we have the two recommendations there in their entirety, so I don't think there's any need for further comment, so we'll do this with a show of hands. All those in favour? Councillor Bowen? Yep, thank you. Against? That's carried unanimously, thank you. Right, moving through to number 7, elected member appointment to the Acacia Birch Trust Board. There's a memo there from our governance manager on page 111.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take it as read and answer any questions.
Great, thank you. So, councillors, this is a little bit of admin work, really. It's around making sure we can have a quorum at that trust board as it's being transitioned. So, obviously, myself as the mayor and Councillor Dingwell sit on that trust board, and we had a resignation, unfortunately, at the 11th hour, which is seeking another trustee. So we have a resolution there around appointing Councillor Dennison to the trust board, and yeah, I'll ask you any questions. Councillor Harpiter.
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Before we do that, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 2 quick questions, Hannah. Are we confident that the appointment is only needed until 1 August?
We are.
Thank you. And then just my second question was, did you do any due diligence on the member?
No. The Mayor recommends him.
A kicker in the shins.
That's a hospital pass. Okay. Any other questions? There being none, we have the resolution that the Council resolves that Councillor Dennison be appointed trustee of the Acacia Birch Trust Board until 1 August 2022. That's moved by Councillor Harpiter, seconded by Councillor Finlay. Any comments? There being none, we'll do this with a show of hands. All those in favour? Against? Abstain? That's carried. Thank you. Congratulations, Councillor Dennison. Right. Moving through to number 8 on our reports, and that's our work schedule, page 113. And it's around receiving our work schedule. Are there any questions of the CE or officers on? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I was just interested, the third one down, the low carbon roadmap. I was just wondering why that is to come to council rather than back to the Environmental Sustainability Committee.
It's a good question. We'll investigate and come back to you, Councillor.
I mean, unless there's a specific resolution that directs it to council, I would have thought it made more sense for it to go to the environmental sustainability first, unless there was an issue of timing or a significant issue of timing.
We'll come back to you. Hold on. I'll just ask Mr. Murphy, our Chief Planning Officer, to comment.
Yeah, look, all the work we've been doing on climate change has been reported in through that Environmental Sustainability Committee in terms of the corporate emissions, the citywide emissions. This low carbon roadmap is really about the plan going forward for those citywide emissions. So I think it is appropriate that it goes to the Environmental Sustainability Committee.
Great. All right, we'll move that to Councillor Barrett's committee. Okay, Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering about the remits received from territorial authorities, and if that wasn't happening today, what the timeline is on that?
Yeah, we've just received one yesterday. It will have to come to our nearest possible committee and then obviously to council at the next council meeting. They're sometimes slow in getting these remits to us, and it just then becomes a timing issue. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering, with the elected members' code of conduct report, it seems strange to be signing that off a short time before a council election. I'm wondering if, given that it's been delayed this far, that might be better to be dealt with early in the next triennium.
I'll just get an officer comment there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So you're right, we could deal it in the next triennium, but we do have the option of doing it now, so I suppose it's, yeah, you have a choice. Is that right? We will do it. Oh, we will. Oh, we will. Oh, sorry, I stand corrected. So the advice I've got is that we will be doing it in the next triennium, but we can do it now, but it will have to also be done in the next triennium as well.
Oh, okay. Well, that seems a bit of, I won't say a waste of time, but it seems a bit unnecessary to be doing it twice quite close together. I don't know what the process is for suggesting that just be dealt with in the new triennium. Is anyone able to advise?
Councillor, most of the, if not all the work's been done, so it really is a case of bringing it to council, any debate on any small issues, and either approving it or not approving it.
You know, I totally understand that, but if we're going to do it in June and then again a few months later, I just wanted to avoid doing things twice and trying to be efficient. That's all.
Yep. Good. Thank you. All right. Any other matters arising from that? Could we get the recommendation up, please? Thank you. All right, we have our work schedule. Council resolves to receive the work schedule dated May 2022. I'll look to move that. Seconded by Councillor Hapera. No further comments to that. We'll do this with a show of hands. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously, thank you. Right, we move through to receiving our committee reports and recommendations from committee meetings. And I'll go first to our Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee and recommendations from their meeting of the 13th of April 2022. The Chair has left the meeting, so I'll come to you, Deputy Chair of that committee, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of the Chair, my pleasure to present for adoption the Part 1 Public Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee recommendations from its meeting of 13th April 2022.
And that's been seconded. Thank you, Councillor. That's been seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising from that? We have the resolutions there to adopt and the clauses. It's around our 6 monthly reports, the Regent, Te Manawa, Globe, Acacia Birch. There being none, we'll do this with a show of hands. I'll wait for the screen to come back up. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, we move through to our recommendations from our Planning and Strategy meeting of 13th of April 2022. I'll ask the Chair, the Deputy Mayor, to address those, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I would like to move recommendations from the 13th of April 2022 Planning and Strategy Committee meeting, recommendations 1.22 and 20.22 as per the order papers. And then we're just moving in an alternative recommendation on 1922, recommendation 1, and that would read that direction on the Arena Master Plan review be provided by Council via reporting through the Planning and Strategy Committee, and that a workshop with elected members is planned to assist the preparation of this work. The substance of the recommendation does not change. It is just to clarify the word direction could be misunderstood to indicate that there is a decision made in a workshop. And so we've just reframed this to ensure that it is clear that the workshop is to assist with the preparation of what would then come into the chamber for decisions.
Okay, so we have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. So you're happy to second all of them? Great, thank you. That keeps it tidy. Does anybody want these separated? Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any comments to this? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a brief comment on that amended wording. I'd just like to thank officers for their consideration of that, which I think much better aligns with the LGA and much better aligns with our own policy on workshops. I think it's really important that we are clear about where our decisions happen, and obviously we're aware that that doesn't happen in workshops. So I think the amended, the updated wording I'm much more comfortable with and very happy to support.
Okay, councillors, no further comments. We'll do this with a show of hands. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, we move through to number 11 on the order paper. It's around recommendations from our Finance and Audit Committee, their meeting of the 27th of April 2022. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to those, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendations from the Public Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from the 27th of April 2022 meeting be approved.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Naylor. Thank you. Right. We have the recommendations or resolutions from that meeting around our Wakakotahi Recreation Pathway Fund, around the Te Turanga Highway, our quarterly performance report and finance report for the quarter ended 31 March 2022, reallocation of events-related budgets, and that is moved by the Chair and the Deputy Chair of Finance. I'll go to any comments. There being none, Councillor Harpster.
Just matters arising for the item, has gone off the screen, was just to do with the quarterly report, just following up on the glass recycling. We didn't get any response for the number of complaints and when it was going to be restarted. So we didn't get any response back on either of those two. So I just wondered if we could get a response back as a follow-up on
yeah,
that.
I've chased the CE on that as well, and we're just waiting for a firm sort of date that we can come back to you and the public on.
So we're in the chamber, so I just wondered if there was a response today.
It's around the glass recycling and things coming back online.
Yeah, I've had an email from my staff this morning to
say that we haven't, I'm conscious we haven't done any media or any announcements about it yet, so we do need to get all that done. But I've had an email from my staff this morning, having worked through all the logistics, saying that we intend to start glass collections again on Monday. But we do need to work through all of our communication with residents, media, and all of those people, including how we communicate about collecting the backlog.
Well, I'd hope councillors are part of the stakeholders as well. So thank you for telling us.
Would definitely get something from us as you know, I send you all of my hot topic updates.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. It's good news too. We need to get back to BAU. Appreciated. Okay, any other matters arising from that meeting? There being none, we will look to vote, please, with a show of hands. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Number 12, which is recommendations from our Recreation, Play, Sport Committee, and of the 27th of April, I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Meehan, to speak to those recommendations, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move the recommendations from the Play, Recreation and Sports Committee meeting, Public Part 1, held on the 27th of April 2022, be adopted.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Deputy Chair, Councillor Harpiter. This is around clauses, the Manawatu Gym Sports Regional Facilities proposal and the results of the 2022 audit of shade provision in parks. That's seconded by Councillor Harpiter. Okay, any comments, matters arising to those? There being none, we will vote, please. Show of hands. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move through now to our Part 2, exclusion of the public. And I'll look that the Council resolves that the public be excluded for our Part 2 component, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there's no comment to that, I'll ask you to vote, please. All those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll just wait a couple of moments.